Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
Thank you for
warahmatullahi
coming
wabarakatuh.
to this presentation. Let me introduce myself and my partners. I'm Sri Wahyuni, and my partner is Salsabila and Norleny Habibah. We are from Group 3, and this presentation, we will discuss about testing and assessing speaking discrimination. Okay, the first, speaking. Speaking is a productive skill that can be directly and empirically observed. Those observations are invariably colored by the accuracy and the effectiveness of a test taker's listening skill, which necessarily compromise the reliability and validity of an oral productation test. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Yep, basic types of speaking. Okay, the first is imitative. Imitative tasks focus on the ability of the test taker to simply imitate or parrot a word, phrase, or sentence. This is assessment focused on the phonetic level or oral productions, not meaning and requires listening just for the prompt. This type of assessment help teachers assess the student pronunciation skills. And then the second, intensive. The intensive aspect of speaking requires test hackers to produce short stretches of language. Their tasks are key, and the student will demonstrate their linguistic ability. Pictures can be very simple or more elaborate that tells a story, or even disease assessment can be customized and created to cater to the teacher or student needs. This assessment can be authentic when formatted meaningfully. And then the third is responsive. According to Brown, assessment of a responsive tasks involve brief interaction with an intercultural differing from intensive tasks in increased creativity given to the test taker and from interactive tasks by the somewhat limited length of utterance from Douglas Brown and Abe Wikrama 2011. This aspect of assessment helps the teacher realize the student ability to participate in discussion. Question and answer tasks usually consist of a couple questions that are simple. Questions at this level are usually referential questions in which the test taker is given more opportunities to produce meaningful language response. This assessment is usually one-on-one, student and teacher, but may include other students. This can be customized to varying proficiency levels and student or teacher needs. Okay, next, interactive. Interactive speaking is similar to responsive speaking but includes tasks that involve long stretches of interactive discourses of language. This can be interviews, role play, discussion, and games. Other tasks that are used for but involve less interaction are speeches, extended explanation, and translation. One of the most common assessments for oral productions is an oral assessment. This assessment, as well as other interactive speaking assessment, allows teacher to evaluate student ability in producing fluid, detailed, and an in-depth discussion. Okay, the last about extensive. Extensive speaking is one of the most difficult aspects of speaking. The speaking tasks involve complex, relatively length stretches of discourses oral presentations are used in an authentic life-like assessment. It is common for individuals to present on a report, sales idea, new product, at some point in their life. Oral presentations allow students to use what they learn in English by culminating everything in one solid presentation. A checklist or grid is common means of scoring and evaluation. Below include a document of sample topics that are used at a community college. Teachers can choose topics that naturally interest students and address their proficiency level. Below the possible topics, I include a rubric from another source that can be used as a resource that can help grade the student oral presentations. Okay, next slide talk about micro and macro skills of speaking. Micro skill is concerned to produce the smaller chunks of language such as phonemes, morphemes, words, collections, fluency, and phrasal units. And macro skill implies the speaker focus on the larger elements such as accuracy, discourse, style, cohesion, nonverbal communication, and strategic option. Okay, next slide. Okay, in this slide, talk about objective to assess speaking. You can see that. Then next, we are talk about yeah, three important issues as you set out to decide on task. The first is a no-speaking task is capable of isolating the language skill of oral presentation, of oral production. And then the second is electing the specific criterion you have decided for a task can be tricky. Make sure your allocation from achieve its aims as closely as possible. And then the third, the last is important to carefully specific scoring procedures for a response so that ultimately you achieve as high a reliability index as possible. Okay, enough for me. Next will be explained by my partner, Salsabila. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Yuyun. So, I'm going to explain about designing assessment tests. The first one is imitative speaking. According to the first speaker explanation, imitative speaking is ability to simply parrot back or imitative word or praise. So, in imitative speaking, designing assessment test focus on repetition test. This is example of imitative speaking test is PON-PASS test. PON-PASS test is a popular speaking test in many countries. The PON-PASS test elicits computer-assisted oral production over a telephone. The test have 5 sections, part E, B, C, D, and E. Test taker, the first one is read aloud and then repeat sentences and answer question and talk about their opinion. Test taker are directed to telephone a designated number and listen for direction. Scores for the PON-PASS test are calculated by a computerized scoring template are reported back to the test taker within a minute. Example of part E and B is oral reading and imitation. And then the second is intensive speaking. In intensive speaking, test takers are prompted to produce short stretches of discourse. Example of test in intensive speaking, the first one is direct response test. Direct response test is the test administrators elicit a particular grammatical form or transformation of a sentence. And then read aloud test. Intensive reading aloud test is include reading beyond the sentence level up to a paragraph or two. The scoring scale are included pronunciation and fluency. Read aloud in PONPES is like a sentence, but in this intensive speaking, read aloud test is paragraph. And then sentence or dialogue completion test and oral questionnaires. Test takers are first given time to read through the dialogue, to get its gist and to think about appropriate lines to fill. So the test taker can complete the dialogue and give direct response. And then picture cue test. Each test requires a description from the test taker. So the test taker can describing about the picture. A picture might be very simple and designed to elicit a word or phrase. Scoring responses on picture cue intensive speaking test varies, depending on the expected performance criteria. For example, if in this picture asking to describe the picture, so the test taker can describing about the picture. And scale of scoring is evaluating a grammar, vocabulary comprehension, fluency, pronunciation, and others. And then the last translation of limited stretches of this course. The test taker is given a native language, word phrase, or sentences, and is asked to translate it. Condition is an instant translation of an orally elicit linguistic target to allowing more thinking time before producing a translation. Translation in this in intensive speaking is translation direct in translation, instant translation. So will be next, Bibah. Please Bibah to unmute. Yes.
Thank you, Sasa. Next, I will explain about responsive speaking. Okay. Responsive speaking. First, question and answer. Test taker gets question from an interviewer. The question is intensive in its purpose, and the test taker is given more opportunity to produce meaningful language and response. For example, question and answer is question eliciting open-ended responses. And second, giving instruction and direction. Test taker should respond with appropriate instruction or direction. And for example, eliciting instruction and direction. Third, paraphrasing. Test taker read on here a limited number of sentences and produce a paraphrase of the sentence. For example, paraphrasing a story. And fourth, test of spoken English or TSA. TSE is a 10-minute auditive test of oral language ability. TSE usually used by North American institutions of higher education to select international teaching associations such as nurse, pharmacist, etc. The tasks on the TSE are designing to electric oral production in various discourse categories rather than phonological, grammatical, or lexical targets. Core of TSA are pronunciation, grammar, and fluency. The content specification following and, for example, test spoken English. Next, interactive speaking include tasks that involve relatively long stretch of interactive discourse and tasks of equally long duration, but that involve less interaction. First interview, a test administrator and a test taker sit down in a direct face-to-face exchange and process through a protocol of question and direct type. The interview may be tape recorded for a listening score such as accuracy and pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, usage, fluency, sociolinguistic, task accomplishment, and event conversation. For example, oral interview content specification. And second, role play. Each free student should be somewhat creative in their linguistic output. Role play allows some rehearsal time so that students can map out what they are going to say. And it has the effect of lowering anxieties as students. For example, discussion and conversation. Discussion might be especially appropriate task for which to enrich and observe switch abilities. Next,
Games, Bibah. Part of games and OP.
games. Among informal assessment devices are a variety of games that directly involve language production. As assessment, the key is to specific set criteria and responsibility, practical and reliable scoring method. And five, oral proficiency interview or OPI is widely used across dozens of languages around the world. Specification for the OPI approximate those delineated tasks, electric pronunciation, fluency, and integrative ability, sociolinguistic and cultural knowledge, grammar and vocabulary, OPI on HETFO, American Council of Teaching for Persian Language, with lines for speaking superior, advanced, intermediate, and novice. Next. Extensive speaking. That include complex, relatively length string of discourse. They are frequently variations on monologues, usually with minimal verb interaction. Usually with minimal verbal interaction. First, oral presentation. Usually, in the academic and professional areas will be called on to present a report, a paper, and etc. For example, oral presentation checklist. Okay, picture called storytelling. This level, we consider a picture of a series of pictures as a stimulus for a longer story of description text. Talker talk for a minute about them. The object of eliciting narrative discourse needs to be clear. For example, picture code storytelling task brown. Okay. Relating story and news event. Test taker hear or read a story, a news event that they are to retell. The object in a taking such as vary from listening conversation of the original to production of a number of discourse pieces or communication sequence, stress and emphasizing pattern, expression, fluency, interaction with heard audience, and translation or of action prose. Text occurred in the narrative language and then translate into English. Text could come in many forms. Dialogue direction for assembly of a product, synopsis of a story or play, of or movie direction format, etc. Okay. Reference of our presentation, Brown H. Douglas, 20.
Closing.
Close up.
Reference of our presentation, Brown. Reference of our presentation, Brown H. Douglas, Language Assessment. Thus, the presentation for our group on testing and assessing discrimination. If you have any question regarding the material, please write your question in the Canvas group. Thank you.